In a famous set of neuroscience experiments, researchers studied split brain patients, people whose brain hemispheres have been surgically divided into two by cutting through the corpus callosum. What was so interesting about these people who now had two disconnected brain halves is that they also seemed to have been divided into two people, or two consciousnesses, operating from the same brain. These people experienced their two arms moving, for example, in different directions as if being driven by different intentions and different thoughts, often contradicting each other. For example, a person would be getting dressed with one arm while the other was flinging the clothes off them again. When they were asked why they did this, their responses didn't entirely make sense. They would give confident explanations saying that was their intention all along, or constructing narratives that were untrue in order to explain their contradicting behavior. The brain's language center is situated in the left hemisphere, so anything expressed verbally would be coming from that side, regardless of whether they could express this verbally. It was striking that these patients had no access to conscious awareness of the right hemisphere whatsoever. This led to the remarkable conclusion that the brain is constantly creating stories to make sense of itself. This raises a question. If your brain can make decisions before you're aware of them, and if it can invent explanations for actions it doesn't fully understand, then how do you know that the reality you're experiencing is reality as it truly is? One of the most influential ideas in modern neuroscience is that the brain doesn't simply observe its surroundings, but is actively predicting them. According to predictive processing theories known as predictive coding or Bayesian brain theory, your brain is constantly creating a model of the world based on past experience, and updating the model on whether it is coherent with the feedback that it receives from your senses. Your senses provide information, but often that information is incomplete. For example, the colors you see are interpretations of specific wavelengths of light, yet you don't see them all equally. Your eyes see most clearly and colorfully at the fovea, or the center of your field of view, compared to your periphery, which doesn't detect shapes and colors just as well. Yet your inner perception is a clear, coherent picture. Your photoreceptors are a combination of detectors of basic features such as luminosity, obscurance, continuity, and orientation. Yet you see complex shapes and depth and recognize objects and scenes. The brain fills in the gaps and constructs a coherent story. The sounds you hear are interpretations of pressure waves moving through the air. Yet you have a qualia, a subjective experience of those sound waves that carries emotion, meaning, and positive or negative connotations. When sound wave frequencies can be evenly divided by each other, we perceive this as a harmony, an integration of the mathematical symmetry of these vibrations. The feeling that something is solid emerges from physical interactions between forces and atoms that your nervous system translates into an experience. Atoms are mostly empty space, yet we may perceive them as tightly packed into a solid when they are arranged in a robust configuration. They are then less likely to move out of that shape, which leads to us perceiving a continuous, solid object that maintains its form under different circumstances. Now, all of this doesn't mean that reality isn't real or that nothing quote-unquote exists. Clearly, there is an external world, but the world you experience and the world as it exists independently of perception may not be exactly the same thing. What we experience is filtered through biology. The predictive machinery of the brain made up of our thoughts, memories, genes, and early life programming is constantly transmuting information from the outside into an organized configuration which creates a coherent story. Our brains are channels for external information the same way an instrument is a channel for music. The air that vibrates through an instrument in order to create the music we hear is always present, but not always in the same state. It is the instrument which organizes the air into neatly packaged sound waves, which then produces a meaningful phenomenon. Likewise, our brain is neatly packaging the information in our surroundings to produce a meaningful conscious experience. If all of this is true, then we have to ask another question. How much of reality are we actually capable of perceiving? As humans, we have 5 senses, 5 different ways of interpreting the things around us. Yet that is only 5 out of potentially an infinite amount of interpretations of reality, the others of which we don't have access to. Humans can only detect a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. We cannot naturally see infrared or ultraviolet light. Many animals can perceive aspects of reality that are entirely invisible to us. For example, dogs can literally smell fear, because when we are afraid, hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol are released, which change the chemical makeup of our sweat, which dogs are sensitive enough to pick up on. It is the whole reason that shrimp colors exist. They can detect and integrate a frequency of light which we are unable to do with our bodies. So if different organisms experience a different reality based on their biological equipment to do so, then what does reality actually look like? independent of any observer. Every observation we make is filtered through some perceptual system, and perhaps there are dimensions of reality that we simply do not have the equipment to perceive. Yet while we are limited in our perception, we also may be underestimating it. Perhaps we have senses that we are not yet aware of, because it is not entirely clear to us yet how they function. Think of intuition, gut feelings, hunches. These are often results of internal processes that are very real, but that we don't have conscious access to. The same way we do not consciously perceive our brain cells turning shapes and lighting into recognizable objects and scenes. So far, intuition is thought of as a complex form of pattern recognition of subconscious processes that integrate both your internal world with the external. Science has yet to construct a full picture of how this type of sensing works, but it has already begun to do so. For example, the gut has been found to contain 100 to 500 million neurons, and the gut-brain axis tells us that the gut and brain are constantly communicating via hormones, which have a large impact on our mood, stress, and well-being. Therefore, you literally have gut feelings. The body itself is a concoction of biological patterns that integrate together as a whole. At this moment, billions of processes are happening in your body. Neurons are firing, hormones are being released, immune cells are identifying threats. Yet we don't experience any of these individual events directly. We experience the integrated result. Instead of feeling all the steps of releasing serotonin in the brain, we feel happiness. Instead of feeling all the ways in which the nervous system activates the vagus nerve, slows down the heart rate, starts digestion, we feel more calm. We feel that our nervous system has downregulated and moved out of fight or flight mode. Our experience is a summary of all the detailed processes that are happening in our body at any moment. Think of a large office building of people where every person has information that nobody else has, and everyone has their own distinct role. Yet, if you take everyone's roles and put them together and everyone's knowledge and put that together, you get a larger system, an integrated whole. The human body functions the same way. Humans actually start to behave like cells or particles when they are part of sufficiently large groups. Scientists studying crowds have found that large groups of people tightly packed together often behave like fluids. The movement of thousands of people can produce waves, similar to how water may move in a container. Each human acts like a water molecule, a single entity on its own, but part of a larger substance. So individuals can become part of a larger system whose properties and behaviors cannot be predicted based on the properties and behaviors of one human alone. Again and again, nature seems to produce wholes that are more than the sum of their parts. This brings us to consciousness itself. We can measure neural activity, observe correlations between brain states and awareness. We can know which regions become active during which processes, but we still don't know why experience exists in the first place. Why does the processing of information feel like something? Why is there an observer behind your eyes? Why is there an inner world? The mystery becomes even stranger when we look at free will. In a series of famous experiments beginning with Benjamin Libet, participants were asked to press a button when they felt like it and report when they made the conscious decision to move. At the same time, they were connected to an EEG machine via electrodes, which was measuring their brain activity. Researchers found that activity associated with the upcoming movement appeared in the brain before participants reported making the conscious decision to move. Thus, the brain seemed to be preparing the action before conscious awareness even emerged. And further studies found similar results. Some researchers were even able to predict participants' choices before they made the choice themselves. And then there are the split brain experiments. When connection between the brain hemispheres was severed, researchers observed situations where one hemisphere could influence behavior while the other lacked access to the reason. But when they asked why participants acted in a certain way, they would provide fully confident explanations. Thus, the brain appeared to generate a story. It appeared to be attempting to make sense of events, whether it had the factual knowledge to be able to do so or not. And maybe this isn't unique to split brain patients. Perhaps we are all constructing our individual experiences. The brain is constantly predicting, updating, inferring, creating a story. The story may be useful, accurate even, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% identical to actual reality. A particularly fascinating example of this comes from research on music preferences. In a 2012 study, researchers placed a small group of teenagers in an fMRI scanner and looked at their brain activity while they were listening to music. The participants were then asked to rate how much they liked each song. Years later, the researchers compared their results to the actual commercial success of the songs. And what they found was the teenagers' reporting of whether they liked a song or not was not correlated to the commercial success or non-success. What was correlated to success was activation in the ventral striatum, part of the reward pathway in the brain. The stronger the neural activation in that region, the higher the likelihood that the song would achieve commercial success in the following years. This suggests that the brain processes information information about value, preference, and significance in a way that never fully reaches conscious awareness. This finding echoes a pattern that is often seen throughout neuroscience. Again and again, we find that a great deal of what shapes our thoughts, feelings, decisions, and perceptions is happening beneath the surface of conscious awareness. This raises an intriguing possibility, the possibility that consciousness is really just the last stage of a process that has been happening without our knowledge. And if consciousness is not the creator of every thought, preference, and decision, then what exactly is its role? Is it the author of a story, or is it, at least in part, a narrator trying to make sense of a story that is already unfolding? At this point, it might sound like we're simply passengers. If our brains are constantly predicting reality, if our decisions are influenced by subconscious processes before we even notice, and if much of our experience is constructed by information that we never directly perceive, then where does that leave agency? I don't think these findings eliminate free will, but I do think they force us to redefine it. It seems that consciousness may not be a commander in a control room, issuing orders and deciding every decision and thought. But that doesn't mean it has no influence. One of the most remarkable things about being human is our ability to influence ourselves. Thoughts, physiology, behavior, beliefs, and perception all influence each other. Everything is connected and exists within a feedback loop. And because we exist inside that loop, we can influence it. We can learn from it, reflect on it, challenge assumptions that we have. We can reshape habits, beliefs, and emotional responses. Rather than this idea of being able to act independently of all causes and influences, true freedom and agency may simply be the ability to participate in the process that shapes us. The deeper we investigate reality, the stranger it becomes. The world we experience appears to be a construction, and our senses only reveal a fraction of what is actually there. Consciousness remains unexplained, and the true nature of reality is still up for debate. If this video was helpful to you, please let me know, and if you want to see more, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so I can continue to create mildly unsettling existential content. Let me know in the comments, what do you think consciousness is, and how much do you think we are actually perceiving? Until next time, my loves, stay curious and continue exploring the space between worlds.